Welcome to the Salt Strong Podcast, disrupting fishing entertainment as you know it. Prepare to laugh. Prepare to get to know fishing legends in a whole new and unfiltered way. And on occasion, you might even learn a thing or two about fishing. Here's your host, Joe Simons. Like diamonds.
The most critical election in history? Question mark. Hey guys, Joe Simons. Like diamonds, back again. Salt Strong Unchurched. I was recently with someone who would not stop talking about this upcoming election and kept mentioning, oh my gosh, it's just the most critical one in history and I can't focus. It's all I'm thinking about. And I let the person know in a nice way. I was like, do you realize that 100% of every presidential election since I think it was the 20s, I'll have to go back and find this article, but it was basically as far back as they could track with newspapers and everything. But 100% of them, 100%, not just 90, not 99, 100% of every election history, there's been a headline in one of the major newspapers, New York Times, Washington Post, etc., that actually says this is the most critical election in history. We've been saying that, guys, for 100 years. We have said it about every single election that has ever happened. Now, looking back, yes, there were some that were probably a little bit more critical or more important than others. At the time, we didn't know it, I guess is my point. And I'm willing to bet, and 4 years from now, we'll be saying the same thing because we've said it every single time. What's funny is I told my friend that, I was like, you realize that 100% of every single election we've had, even ones that, knowing what we know now, don't seem like they were that critical, but at the time, all of these newspapers ran it and said this is the most critical election in history. And he says, yeah, but they didn't know. This one definitely is. And so he still couldn't get in his head. But here's where I'm going with this. It's been wild, even talking to my wife here recently, and she was sharing that she's had people who need surgery and are putting it off until after the election. I've had some other friends, things from roofs, AC, my buddy who owns an AC place here in town. He was like, yeah, I mean, people are literally, even though they know their AC could die any second now, and we're still here at the end of the summer, it's brutal hot. And he's like, I'm not doing this doing money. He's like, I can certainly keep repairing it. They're just wasting money because it's about to die any day. And yet they tell me they're putting it off until after the election. And I don't know, I scratch my head like, well, what is really going to change that much? And maybe something, I don't really know, nor do I really care. And where I'm going with this, and I think why I have so much peace about it, this whole podcast is about having no fear, right? And every one of these elections, obviously, we lived through them. I remember when Obama got elected, and I had some friends and family who thought the world was ending. He was the Antichrist, all of this stuff. I mean, that was certainly the most important election in history. And I mean, people literally thought the world was going to end. The rapture was coming, that he was literally the Antichrist. I mean, that made headlines in some very conservative and even some Christian places. And obviously, we lived through that. It wasn't that bad looking back, right? It certainly felt a whole lot easier back then, even from the times right now that just seem so crazy and uncertain, I think is probably the right word to use. And so, as I said earlier, where I'm going with this is just to have no fear. If you do feel that anxiety, like my friend was literally just anxious, like couldn't talk about anything else, losing sleep over this election. Who cares? It's just two people. And I love this one pastor who said, listen, these two people are different personalities, right? And a lot of people seem to be voting for the personalities, right? You got a very, very specific Trump personality, and I don't know what you would call Kamala's personality, a heckler or whatever, but you got these two personalities, and people are kind of getting attached to the personality of the person. And his point was perfect. Personalities don't last. Personalities will be gone in 4 years from now, maybe even earlier, right? But what lasts are policies and the things that they put into action, the people and the judges that they got into to office, right? Those are the things that last. It's the policies, not the personalities of these two candidates. But even so, looking out 10, 15, 20 years, Will this be the most important election in history? I'm guessing not. I'm guessing there will be one in 4 years from now, and one 4 years after that, and one 4 years after that. And end of the day, God is in control. And if we circle this whole thing back to the having no fear, and why should we have any fear? Well, we've got God who's in control. And if you read the Bible, I mean, we're talking about going back thousands of years, not just hundreds like the history of America. In thousands of years, there's been some sort of election or some sort of ruler or dictator who's come into power, and all these different stories in the Bible. And yet, in every one, God was in control and God had a plan. And many times, even took those people out, like, as in, like, took them out, took out their armies, destroyed entire civilizations for the good guys. So we just have to always go back, take a deep breath, and realize, you know what? I shouldn't have fear here about an election that, honestly, yes, our vote does count. And I'm encouraged every one of you guys to vote. At the same point, if we're losing sleep over it and putting things off that we really need, or just acting completely different or irrational, all because of an election, I would honestly challenge you to not do that and to have no fear. Kind of like I do. And maybe some people think I'm a little bit too lackadaisical about it. And even with the news, I just found out about a lot of stuff that was going on. I had no idea about it. I'm not going to tell you what, because you might think I'm crazy, but I was like, I literally don't watch the news. I had no idea. Like, how could you not know this? It was like, all right, tell me how it's impacted you. Tell me how that incident over in the Middle East has actually impacted you. And they couldn't really tell me reasons. Like, I don't care. I don't want to even know about it or lose sleep about it. It honestly doesn't impact me at all, which is another reason I don't watch the crazy news. So I've talked about that many times in the past. And that's why I wanted to have the headline is the most critical election in history, because once again, 100% of elections, presidential elections, for as far back as we can track, 100 years, they have all said that current election was the most critical one in history, in the history of America. So we are very, very predictable on how riled up we get, and we're very, very predictable on how we can believe that this one is the most important, and everything that happens after this is going to be irrelevant because of the decisions made here. I just don't believe it. It's never happened once. I do believe that at the end of the day, God is in control, and regardless of who gets elected, God's still going to be in control. Regardless of who wins this election coming up in November, God is still going to have the ultimate say. Jesus is still going to be around. Jesus is still going to love us. None of that changes. And if none of that changes, why are we getting so worked up over it? So that's my big challenge to you, is just have some peace with all this. That doesn't mean that you still, especially if you are involved in politics, hey, get involved. I think that's a great thing. But if you're not, and you're just someone who is reading every single thing about the news and the election and losing sleep over it and getting riled up, and even potentially impacting your relationships and conversations with people, which has happened with some of our friends and family over this election, that I won't go into details on that, but I mean, already experienced it personally with some things I just had to kind of walk away from and say, I don't want to even get involved in this conversation. There is nothing good that can happen from this conversation around politics and this election. Once again, I really believe it's like Satan is working all of us up to, put us against each other, to create fights and create conflict, even within our own families. Just so sad. I hate seeing that. So I would encourage you to have no fear, put God first, and when you do vote, I love that quote from the pastor. I'm blanking on his name right now, but don't vote for just the personality. Vote for the policies that person is going to most likely implement and have an impact on over the next 4 years. Don't worry about the person per se. The person will be long gone. Some of those policies can't stick around forever. Some for 20, 30, 50, 100 years, as we know from the past. So I do believe that part is very, very important. Do go out and vote. But man, don't get carried away with it. Don't let it ruin your life. Don't let it ruin friendships and family conversations all over an election that honestly in 100 years from now is not going to matter at all. I guess is my point. I mean, if you look back at all these news articles, some of these presidents, most of us in America don't even remember their names, especially the ones who lost. But there was even presidents who won. I mean, I know some people that can name every president who's ever been in power, but some of these names, people can't even mention a single thing that they did or didn't do. Think about that. And at the time, it was in a newspaper that said this is the most critical election in history. And I'm willing to bet no one I know at least could name all of the losers that lost that election, right? So once again, this election in the big scheme of things for our grandkids is probably not going to matter that much. Some of you might disagree, but I can just go back to history and say it's probably going to be a repeatable cycle. Now, there might be some policies that got enacted that may or may not be in place 50, 60, 100 years from now. Who knows? But in general, this is not going to be as big as we all make it out to be. So knowing that, let's not let it ruin our lives. Let's have peace. Let's have no fear. And let's certainly not ruin relationships over it. Guys, I love you. Hopefully this was helpful. I know it was helpful for me just because I've went through it with some friends and family where there was some conversations that were going the wrong way. And at some point, it's just easier to walk away. Say, yeah, you know what? I 100% support your ability to have that viewpoint. I may or may not agree with it. But man, I don't want to go down that path. It goes nowhere. And we're not going to convince each other otherwise. So let's just love each other, have five, and talk about something else. So much easier than getting in a political debate with a family member. It goes nowhere. And that is the worst part about these election years is one, we amp it up to say it's the most critical one in history. And then we all start believing that and almost wanting to fight for it, right? I mean, look at just go on social media for a couple of days and you see how many fights are about politics and about these two people who most of us have never met, who most of us don't know, who most of us will never meet these people. And these people could care two hoots about us in particular. And yet we're willing to sit there and fight and lose friends and friendships and even potentially family members over these two people that honestly don't have much to do with our lives. And I don't know, it's so sad. And that's why I do believe Satan is just sitting there laughing and stirring the pot up. And we're having to pay the price for it. So love you guys. Be loving to others. All we can do is go out there and vote and tell our own kids, right, and our own grandkids some beliefs. I do think that's really, really important to kind of shape the people in our family. But to go out there and with a wide net and try to just pick fights with other adults, probably not the best use of our time. Have peace. Have love, have God, have Jesus in your lives. Love you guys, and I will talk to you on the next episode.
'Cause fishing, it's in my soul, it was pain.